Location, location, location. Geography matters a great deal, and yet when most people engage the biblical text, the geography just runs right over their head. They don't see the significance of it, they don't know how to utilize it, and they miss so much of the stories that they're engaging with. And in this episode, we're going to talk about geography. We're going to show you how to engage the geography of the Bible and how it unlocks stories in ways you've never seen it before. So let's dive into this episode and see how important geography really is in the biblical context. Friends, welcome to part 3 in our mini-series, Lenses of Context, on how we are studying the Bible better. And it is an illustrated version of this free ebook, The Number One Mistake Most Everyone Makes Reading the Bible. And not just an illustrated version, but we're using different examples as we move through these lenses of context than what are in the ebook in order to give you additional ways in which the Bible is utilizing that lens. And so we started off saying, here is our context lens and framework, if you will, of all these different lenses of context about how we read the Bible in its original context. Part 1, we looked at the historical. In the last episode, we looked at cultural. And this one, we're going to talk about geographical, the importance of geography to the biblical narrative. And I just want to dive in by just showing you a photo of the home that we used to live in when we were back in West Michigan. So we've now been in the Nashville area for 5 years. It's amazing how fast time flies. But not long ago, we were back in West Michigan in our old neighborhood visiting with our neighbors that we had. And the moment that we saw our house, all of these memories flooded back to our minds. For my wife and I, we were like, it was under that tree where we took a picture for our 10-year anniversary. We've been married now for 18 years, but we remember that moment. It was just a beautiful day. Our kids used to play over here, and they were doing all of these fun things. And we remember, like during the wintertime, they're sliding down this hill, and oh yeah, do you remember when that thing happened? Like we were just recounting all of these memories. And it's because we were back in the location of where the memory took place, where the event took place. The same is true if you've ever gone back to your hometown or driven back through your neighborhood that you grew up in. You probably remember all these games that you played or a significant thing that happened there, because when we go back to the location, the memories emerge. And my good friend, Dr. Cindy Parker, she's got this great phrase that just goes like this: geography holds the memory. And when it comes to reading the biblical text in context, the geography matters a great deal. We always want to know where we are on a map and what is going on in that particular location. So what I want to do is I want to just show you a couple of examples that we've actually utilized in other episodes of the teaching series. Now, we've done a lot of teaching series episodes, so maybe some of you will remember these, some of you won't, but then we're going to camp on a brand new example none of you have heard me say in the teaching series. So here's one that is familiar to some of you, Luke 7:11. Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. So this is in connection to that geography holds the memory. And when you come in Luke 7 to this passage, it tells you that location. The moment that you see a location, you want to pause and go, okay, where are we on a map? So here is a map of the land of Israel, and Nain is in the northern part of the country, just to the southwest of the Sea of Galilee. Here's zooming in to where Nain is on a map. Now, if we were to look from the west to the east, here is the image that you would get of the physical location of Nain. And you can see here that it is on the north side of a hill that we just call the Hill of Moreh. And then what you have here is that the city is just on the northern side, and when you come into the Luke 7 passage, it just references Nain. Now, Jesus is going to bring a boy back from the dead, and all the people are going to be like, there's a great prophet that is risen among us. Now, granted, somebody raises someone from the dead, you would probably make that proclamation. But here's one of the other things that you always want to ask when you are looking at a particular location or a location is given in the text is, are there any other events that have happened at this location or in this area? Because when you start to scan the scriptures and you go, well, has anybody else been raised from the dead? One of the stories you come across is Elisha raising the Shunammite's son. And when you ask the question, where is Shunem? Shunem is on the south side of the hill of Moreh. And so you have this story of Jesus in Nain going, this is on the same hill that Elisha raised a boy back to life. And some of archaeologists believe that since Shunem is a story coming from the Older Testament, that by the time of the New Testament, residents that were part of Shunem have moved over to Nain. And so whether that is the case or we're just talking about two sides of the same hill, as Dr. Cindy Parker reminds us, geography holds the memory. Luke wants you to know Jesus is doing something in the same area, along the same lines of what Elisha did, and now you're supposed to go, okay, I need to pay attention to the connections between Jesus and Elisha, and all that comes from the fact of Luke including the story happened at Nain. And by the way, Jesus doesn't do anything random. The location is significant to the story. So that's just one case in which geography holds the memory. Now let me give you another example that we've looked at before on just the importance of knowing where you are on a map. Genesis 12:1, the Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. And then a few verses later here in Genesis 12 we read, so Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. So now we have a location, and the temptation would be, okay, well, he's leaving from Haran. You go a couple chapters later, and you get this passage in Genesis 15. Then God said to Abram, I am the Lord who brought you from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. So Abram is now in the country, but now we are finding out that in this additional story that God actually had called him from Ur of the Chaldeans. So we have Ur of the Chaldeans, we have Haran, and we have a passage that says God goes, leave your family, your father's household, go to a new place, and it just said that Abram went. And when we pull up a map here and we go, okay, well, where are some of these locations? We're talking about the journey of Abraham from Ur of the Chaldeans all the way up through Haran to come into the land of Canaan. Now, you go, well, is that far? Well, let's overlay a modern map so that you can see the countries that Abram walked through. So he starts near Kuwait, he goes up through Iraq, Syria, into Turkey, back down through Syria, through Jordan, and into the land of what's Israel today. And you go, oh my goodness, that is a long direction, or long path that he has to take, and it's 1,100 miles at the pace of sheep and goats because Abraham is a shepherd. And again, the text just says, so Abram went. This is what we call an economy of words. Not much is given, but a vast distance is covered. That's important to know because Hebrews will tell us that Abraham obeyed and went even though he didn't know where he was going. That is significant to the idea of faith. And when God calls you to go, you're not asking for all the details. You are faithful in walking out what God is asking you to do. So that's another example, and we've looked at that before in the teaching series. One more that we've looked at in the teaching series when we talked about the journey with the Apostle Paul And it happened that while Apollos was at Corinth, Paul passed through the inland country and came to Ephesus. So we've got Ephesus here, but this phrase, inland country. And now you pull up a map and you go, well, where is Paul coming from? You realize he's coming from Syrian Antioch, or Antioch on the Orontes, and he's going through the inland country to come to Ephesus. Friends, that's 600 miles. And again, it's an economy of words. In a very, very short amount of words, we are talking about 600 miles. And it's not a walk in the park to get to Ephesus. It is quite the journey to get there. All right, so those are some examples that we have looked at before. Here is a brand new example. Wait till you see this. And I'm going to string a bunch of passages together, and we're going to bring it all together at the end. So hang with me for the next few minutes. The payoff is there. All right, so I want to talk about the Jordan River and John the Baptist baptizing at the Jordan River. So notice this passage from John 1:28. These things took place in Bethany across the Jordan where John was baptizing. So John the Baptist is baptizing people, and we are told here in John 1:28 that Bethany across the Jordan. So where is that? Well, on a map here, you can see that Bethany is just here north of the Dead Sea. And the question we want to ask is this just a random location that John the Baptist has chosen? Or is this a significant location and there is a reason why he is baptizing there? Well, let's take a look at another passage, and this is from Luke 1:16-7, when the angel Gabriel is speaking to Zechariah in the temple about a son that his wife Elizabeth will now bear. This is the first time he's like, I didn't think we were going to have any children. And notice what is said. And he, John, will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah. Okay, let's highlight that phrase, in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready for the Lord a people prepared. So this is talking about what the identity of John the Baptist is, what he is going to do. He's going to come in the spirit and the power of Elijah. Now, let's look at a really odd passage that maybe some of us have scratched our heads before in the past going, why do I need to know that? Matthew 3:4. Now John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. Like, why do you need to know that? Well, when you get one of these details, you want to ask the question, does this show up anywhere else in the text? And we're talking about this in terms of a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt. And you go, oh, in 2 Kings 1:8, Elijah wore a garment of hair with a leather belt around his waist, or about his waist. The same two descriptions. That John the Baptist is actually wearing the same apparel that Elijah wore. Why? Because if he's coming in the spirit and the power of Elijah, then John is doing certain things to align himself with the prophet Elijah. Now, the question that I want to just ask now is, well, where did Elijah's ministry end? And does that have anything to do with what John the Baptist is doing in the location he's doing? Well, if you know the story, Elijah is going to go up in a chariot of fire. And when he goes up in a chariot of fire, he is with Elisha. And they cross the Jordan River going to the east. Elijah goes up in a chariot of fire, and then Elisha is going to cross the Jordan River again with the cloak of Elijah. Some of you know this story, to come back west. Now notice what it says here in 2 Kings 2:15. Now when the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho saw him, talking about Elisha opposite them, they said, the spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha, and they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. So where we have this at Jericho, and they're just opposite is where Elisha is coming across from the Jordan River, and you go back on a map, you go, opposite of Jericho is the location where John the Baptist is actually baptizing. And so for John, what he is doing here is that he's coming in the spirit and the power of Elijah. How do you demonstrate to the people this is what you are about? You act like Elijah. You wear the same things as Elijah. You pick up your ministry where Elijah's ministry dropped off, and this is where John is baptizing. Now, what's interesting is that when you read in the Gospels, and you can go to Matthew 3 and see this, is that what John is doing is that he is calling the people of God to be who they were always called to be. That's why in Luke it says that as he comes in the spirit and the power of Elijah, he's going to turn the people back to God. He's going to prepare the way for the coming Messiah. Now check this out from Joshua chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, talking about when Israel crossed into the land. And the people passed over opposite Jericho. No way. Now the priest bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firmly on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all of Israel was passing over on dry ground until all the nation finished passing over the Jordan. Friends, this is the same area where Israel crossed into the land. And it's like John the Baptist goes back to that area where they crossed the Jordan River, and he says, you are called to be the people of God, and you haven't lived in to that identity. And so through John's preaching, he's getting them to see who they were called to be and to repent, to essentially turn from their ways, to immerse themselves in the water as a way of saying, I am passing from me all the things that I should have been doing and haven't done, and I'm reclaiming my identity to then walk back into the land as the people of God. But friends, we know that the people struggled to be able to do that. And so when we find out that Jesus goes down to be baptized by John, John is baptizing here, and it's like Jesus' entire life is lived on the canvas of the Exodus and Israel story, and that where Israel struggled to get things right, Jesus is going to get right. And when Jesus is baptized, he is identifying with Israel's story. And it's an indication that what Jesus is doing is that he is going to go forth in his ministry, being the picture of who Israel was supposed to be. And he was going to call people to join him on the journey of demonstrating what God's will and way looks like in flesh and blood here on earth. And we get all of that in connection to this location. And so when you interpret Jesus' baptism story, there's so much more going on, but at the very least, you got to understand, why is the geography given? What do I need to know? What has happened there before so that we can better understand the story? So when it comes to geography, here are some key questions that we want to ask. The first one just being, where are we on a map? Like, get out an atlas, get out a map, figure out where are we. And again, in the ebook are a number of fantastic resources for you to be able to do this. What do we know about this location? You know, are we dealing with mountains, valleys, deserts, etc.? And how is that impacting the story? Is this an urban or a rural setting? Who lives there? What are they like? Some additional questions here. Who's the ruling authority? Now that's a more of a political piece to that and a historical piece, but as we mentioned earlier in the series, these lenses are all blending together. You want to know, okay, so who's ruling this area and how is that impacting the story? What's the flow of traffic like around the area? And then here's again that really big question. Has anything happened in this location before? The geography holds the memory. So as you tap into the geography, what are those other stories that may be informing this present narrative that you are engaging in? And so friends, thanks so much for watching another episode of Lenses of Context. Geography matters a great deal. It's my contention, and I mentioned this in the ebook, 90% of the stories in the Bible are predicated on their geography. That's what I believe. That's a Bradism. And so if you can figure out the geography, it's going to help you to better understand the story you're reading, figure out that geography in order to better interpret the biblical text. So friends, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for listening. And as always, may you walk out the text well in your life.